Good afternoon. Thank you, everybody. I am, as Russell said, a securities attorney, and I have helped people start, grow, and finance their companies for over 30 years now. In the last couple of years, I've also worked with high net worth individuals, founders, angel investors, and C-level executives with their securities decisions. And so being able to see this from both sides has helped me better to advise companies and people who want to start companies as to what are the critical things they need to look at if they're going to attract capital, if they're going to grow and be successful and healthy companies. So we were talking a little bit in the previous presentation about the lottery. Well, sometimes people feel like starting a company is like entering a lottery. You have about as much of a chance. But that's just a lot of the high-profile, really, really successful companies. There are many other companies who maybe never hit that Twitter lottery, but that are vital. They employ people, they create jobs, and they do wonderful things. So, but if you can avoid some of the problems that I'm going to talk about here, you have a much better chance of getting your company launched correctly and attracting the kind of capital that you need to grow. Now, there are only 5, I've only got 15 minutes, so this is the very, very, very condensed version. There are more than 5 critical areas to look at, and there's far more detail than I'm going to go into here, but we're going to just zip through it. Okay, the 5 areas that you need to look at are the formation issue, the team, the IP, the capital structure, and fundraising. That's it, thank you. No, I'm going to go into detail now. Forming the company, all right. Number 1 is choosing the company's legal structure. Well, why is that important? Because it's the foundation for what follows next. Everything I'm going to talk about here is a foundation for a next step, for a next level. You have plan 1 in place so that you can go ahead for the next stage. When you choose the company's legal structure, the basic decision is, do you pick a corporation or do you pick a limited liability company or LLC? The answer, as you'll find the answer is for most legal questions, is it depends. Depends on what your goals are. Do you want to grow a company to sell it? Do you want to grow a company to hand it down to your kids as a legacy company? Do you really not know what you want to do with it yet? How you feel about that, what your end goal is, will in part dictate what kind of entity you pick. And I say entity to be interchangeable with company. Basically, it's a separate legal person that will protect you and protect your assets and your family's assets. It's like putting a shell around your business, your company, your idea, your passion. Different tax attributes. There are a number of different things to look at when you pick your company. One is tax situation. One is how many different kinds of employees, owners, investors you might have. There are some forms of entities, for example, the owners have to be U.S. citizens or resident aliens. So just be cognizant of that. When you think about forming your company, talk to somebody about the different kinds of entities that are available to you. Number 2 is what jurisdiction? Where, under the laws of what jurisdiction are you going to form this entity? Is it going to be domestic U.S.? Might be foreign. Don't know. The 2 most obvious choices for those of us who are in California are a California entity or a Delaware entity. In Silicon Valley, most of the new companies formed, especially if you're going to seek venture capital, angel capital, are Delaware corporations, actually. Part of that is because the body of law and knowledge about Delaware corporations is much more extensive than a California entity. There's a special court in Delaware dedicated to handling corporate cases. And so we lawyers like certainty and predictability as much as we can. So that's why most people advocate choosing Delaware corporations. Another reason is like VCs, especially, and angel investors too, are creatures of habit. They're much more likely to invest in something they know and are comfortable and familiar with. And that, in most cases, is a Delaware corporation. But also, I'm going to just give you a flip side. Just because somebody like me is standing here saying this is the most commonly used form, it might not be the best for you. So ask questions. Well, what other kinds of entities are there? Should I be thinking about something else? And have it get so you understand, so that you're comfortable with the decision that you make, that you know why you choose the entity you do, and you can explain it to other people. Formation issues. What does forming the company mean? Well, there's the technical definition, and then there's the to be really safe version. The technical definition is I can go online, I can fill out a California Article of Incorporation form, I can file it with the Secretary of State. Have I formed a California corporation? Technically, I have. Is it completely formed? Am I really protected against, liability? No, not really, because forming a company means completing the formation. Articles, bylaws, determining your board of directors, setting that up with minutes, those first initial steps. So there's not a lot of information out in the world about that. A lot of people think, I fill out the form, I file it, boom, I've got a company. It's not that. So when you set out to form your company, make sure you're going through all the steps that you need to do. So what if you don't? What happens? Well, what can happen is if you're ever in a situation where you face potential liability, if the corporation isn't formed all the way, a court could look at that and say, you weren't serious about this. You only went to step one. There are 4 more steps to forming a company. You didn't do that. Therefore, we might not honor the corporate protection. We might come after you individually. Okay, so who forms the company? DIY, the do-it-yourself, versus online versus attorney. I know that there are a lot of intelligent people in the world, and particularly in this room. And we can go online and find information. We can go to LegalZoom. We can get a book and look at it and say, okay, if I follow these steps, I've got a perfectly formed company. Maybe yes, maybe no. As you form, as your company becomes more complex, especially if you're going to go outside and raise capital, especially from a venture capitalist, there are certain things that they expect to see in your corporate documents that your LegalZoom doesn't tell you about. So you want to make sure that, again, you're doing things with the end in mind. If you're seeking sophisticated capital, you're building a company in a way that will not put off that sophisticated capital. So I also can tell you that there are probably millions of do-it-yourself formed companies that never run into a problem, too. Most of them are not seeking sophisticated capital or sophisticated joint venture partners or sophisticated whatever, participation in the corporate realm. It's always a good idea before you do it yourself to just check with an attorney or someone knowledgeable to make sure that you're going through the steps you need to go through and that you're putting in the things that are expected to be in a fully formed company. I have dealt with a lot of clients where I've had to step in and clean up a lot of do-it-yourselfers. Not because of anything that they did wrong necessarily, because they didn't know. So it can be much more efficient and give you greater peace of mind if you get it done by somebody who knows what they're doing. It really helps. When to form the company? How early? Is there any time when it's too early? Yeah, probably. I'm not going to deal with the IP issues there because there may be reasons from an IP perspective why you want to form it sooner rather than later. But if you're just formulating an idea, if you're thinking about putting together a venture, maybe you haven't quite come up with who's all in on the team yet, may not be the right time to form your company because you may have to go and change everything later. So that's another question to think about. Where in the process am I? Am I starting to do business as this company? Am I using a company name? Am I going out and telling people about my company? Am I signing any contracts? That's the time when you need to have that company formed if you haven't before then. So forming the company, legal issue 1. Number 2, designating the team. Determining who's on the team. I have a lot of clients who come and say that they have this team consisting of 5 people. Well, but only 3 of them own an interest in the company. And one of them is an independent contractor, And one of them is not yet officially on the team, but maybe she's going to be on the team when she leaves her current job. So there's a lot of issues that come up with who's on the team, who's not. When you know, and who's missing. If you're seeking funding, who else do you need on your team? Are you lacking a top financial person? Are you lacking the administrative, operations person? So who's on your team, who's missing? Before you go out and seek sophisticated capital, have that missing person in mind, or be able to explain to the people from whom you're seeking capital, yes, I know I'm missing this link. I'm going to be bringing this person on as soon as we reach this level of funding, or as soon as we reach this other milestone. And make sure that people who you think are on the team actually have agreed to be on the team. Don't be premature. Don't say, yes, we've got blank on our team, when really blank hasn't agreed to be on it yet. When you get those agreements, document them. Really important. Have it in writing. Everybody doesn't need an employment agreement, but it's nice to have an understanding, especially if you're going to point number 2, if you're promising these people ownership in the company, whether it's straight ownership, whether it's options, some other kind of ownership stake, that really needs to be in writing. First of all, because you want to know how much of your company you've already given away, percentage-wise. Your investors will ask you that, and they'll want that answer to be correct. Number 2, you don't want to create expectations that aren't real. Time and time again, we see a company that's just starting to take off. You have somebody coming in from left field saying, oh, by the way, the CEO promised me 15% of the company 2 years ago because I put together the website. It wasn't in writing. It could mess up a financing. It could mess up a lot of deals. So know who your team members are, what you've promised them, and put it in writing. I have bad actors here because the SEC and the state securities agencies are putting a new emphasis on the presence of bad actors. And I don't mean many of the ones that we see on TV. I'm talking about people who have committed a felony. They've been found guilty of securities law violations. Not a good person to have on your team. Many avenues of fundraising will be closed off to you if you've got a bad actor. So do your due diligence. Ask your team members and prospective team members about their past. Have they been involved in any venture that went under? Have they declared bankruptcy personally within the last few years? Know who your team is. Okay, 3. I'm going to actually shut most of this off to Karina because it's her area, not mine, but it's really important area. Define, gather, and protect the IP. Make sure that the intellectual property that's critical to your company is owned by the company. If you have people working for you as independent contractors, make sure the appropriate documentation is signed. It's really much easier to get people to sign things before they do the work than to have to chase them down a few years later when you're trying to get funding, and you need to make sure that IP is there. Okay. The employee versus independent contractor issue is a big one for starting companies. They want the tax advantages of using independent contractors. However, there are, like I said, in IP effects of that may not be as beneficial to the company. So talk with a CPA, a lawyer, get the full picture of what an employee relationship versus an independent contractor relationship really means for your IP. 4, designing the capital structure. Capital structure goes hand in hand with fundraising, which is number 5. Capital structure of your company, who owns what and how much you have left to sell or give away or use as an incentive, is fundamental to the company's growth. It is the foundation. If your foundation is rocky, your whole structure, your whole company's future could crumble. So when I talk about designing it, you want to have a capital structure. If it's a corporation, it's going to be common stock, preferred stock, other equity kickers, to allow the company to grow through incentivizing employees, options, other kinds of incentive comp-related securities, fundraising, preferred stock usually for angel investors and VCs. If your capital structure doesn't have those elements built in, you're going to have to either put off your fundraising until you get them in place, or you're not going to perhaps attract the kind of investors you want to attract. Staged growth. Every stage builds to the next stage. You bring in your angel investors with a mind towards figuring out what your venture round is going to look like. That way, you don't get surprises, the angel investor doesn't get a surprise, and the venture capitalist doesn't get a surprise. And the last point about capital structure is a good capital structure allows you to do these things, but it's also flexible. It allows you to change. Let's say you need to create a new series of preferred stock because you've got a special investor, a strategic investor who just came along. Your capital structure should allow you to do that without too much trouble. Last page, raising capital. All right. The different ways to raise capital, there are lots of options available to you. There's friends and family, your closest buddies. There is now crowdfunding. We have, well, not yet. We have 589 pages of proposed regulations that the SEC issued a couple weeks ago that just make for thrilling reading. I would read them out loud in a dramatic thing, but we don't have time today. So just know that crowdfunding is not here yet. Hopefully it's coming when, I have no idea. So that will be an avenue. It's going to be regulated way over the top, so it may wind up being regulated to death. We'll have to see. Angel investors, VCs, all different kinds of ways of raising capital, they all have their own kinds of regulations. So don't try to do it yourself. Please ask somebody who's done it. Ask an attorney, whoever, about what information you need to know, how you keep yourself and your company safe when you're raising capital. Again, thinking a stage ahead. If I want to raise this much, if I need $500,000 to get me through the next year, okay, well then what about the next 2 years? What happens next? Stage it. And a good securities attorney should be able to help you stage capital. Finally, most importantly, I guess, there are tons of securities laws out there. There are lots of traps for people who don't know how to raise capital effectively and safely. So it's a huge area. It's, like I said, with the crowdfunding regs, it's changing as we speak. So please feel free to contact me or any other securities counsel you know about what you need to do to get your company from the idea that you have to something that's huge and successful and flourishing. Thank you.